Alright, here we are again, back here with this rusty Sable wagon, working on fixing the rust. If you've been following along in the other videos, up till now we've removed the rusty rocker panel and fixed the up by the front door, the inner brace, and now we're working here in the middle back by the B-pillar. Here I'm clamping the rusty metal in to get some measurements, and we're going to do like the front part and take and build the bottom part in, and slowly it's starting to come back together. Yes, providing yours isn't too rusty, if you can use part of the original, makes it a lot easier. That's where I decided to do this, and there I have it lined up where I drilled the spot welds to take the rusty piece out. And now we're taking a measurement. It looks roughly around 15 inches, perhaps a little bit more. We'll zoom in here and take a closer look. And we're going to take and pull it back off here after we take one more measurement. Or actually, I stand corrected. It'll come back off after the metal is cut and bent, because I'm going to make sure it's in place right. And yeah, here in a few minutes you'll be seeing what I'm talking about. And we're going to take and temporarily tack weld it to that, so we will know it'll fit before we take it and pull it back off the whole way to weld the whole seam. There we're marking 5.5 inches wide is what I need. All in how rusty your car is, perhaps it'll be wider, not as wide. You'll just have to take that into consideration. And there's our speed square, and there, draw a straight line. And I do apologize to anybody that's been following along the delay between the last video than this one, but I have had a very busy schedule and I have a short time here to catch up before things will get busy again. Okay, I have this marked and just taking care of the two lines in the middle. And now we're going to have a clamp fast, and we're going to cut it here with the angle grinder, and that was a good efficient cutting tool. Obviously, if you're going to tackle a job such as this with a rusty vehicle, you are going to need at least one tool or so to cut metal. And if you can only have one, a 4-inch angle grinder is a good choice. I purchased that at Harbor Freight. And now we're going to take and we're just going to simply cut the length of it, which is a very short cut compared to cutting the width. And there it's marked. Clamp it back down fast, and we're going to take and get this taken care of. And besides, of course, something to cut with, C-clamps, sawhorses are handy, and whatever. Again, you'll need multiple tools. Alrighty, that is cut. Now we're going to take and knock it loose with the C-clamp. Yeah, I should have went and grabbed a pair of pliers and grabbed it, but they weren't handy. That was, again, I cheated. Now we're going to take and mark where we're going to put the sheet metal bending brake. 1.125 I made it. Actually, I needed an inch, but I made it slightly because you lose some till you bend it. So, and you don't have to draw a line on this, because when you put it on the sheet metal bending brake, you line those two marks up with the marker, and you just put this heavy plate down on top and carefully line it up where those are. A little bit of adjusting that metal plate, and eventually, I'm sort of being picky here, probably don't have to be this technical. Once you're satisfied where it's at, you just clamp the metal bar across, and that'll hold it in place while you're bending the sheet metal. I had mentioned in the last video, I believe, that the sheet metal bending brake I bought at Harbor Freight, but before Harbor Freight existed, at least in my area, a retail walk-in store, and I ordered it at their mail catalog. But I was to Harbor Freight today, and they do sell it. They don't seem to tout it on their website, but it's a 30-inch bending brake, and they are $69.70 at Harbor Freight. But yes, they do still have them. But again, when I did the last video, I looked on their website. All that was on their website listed was an 18-inch, just a real little bending brake, and then that large 4-foot one that was on $250, and there is our first bend. Now this is easy because I need, in this case, it's as far as you have, 2 3/4 inches wide. And when you put where we had already bent it, you shove it up against the back of the bending brake. It's exactly 2 3/4 inches, so just have to make it good and solid and tight against and clamp it down before you bend it. And I'm actually using, if you notice, the sawhorses to hold the sheet metal bending brake. They're just clamped fast. I did have this mounted on my workbench, but I bought a drill press at Harbor Freight, a bench mount, and it sort of took the place. I use that quite a bit more than I need to bend metal, and this does work with the sawhorses, so, and it's not that often to bend metal, but I do drill holes more often, and there is our completed bent fabricated piece of metal. And here we're going to line it up, the rusty part, and clamp it fast once I find a pair of vice grips. Biggest thing here is just to see where it is going to sit so it can properly mark it to know where to weld, and trim some more of the rusty metal out of the original part, but want to just be sure how if it is going to work. And yeah, I see no reason at all this is not going to work. It is sitting in very well where it should, and we're going to mark it with the magic marker on each side. Okay, that's that. It's time to remove these vice grips so we can get it over on the sawhorse and eventually the bench vise, and do some cutting and some more rust cleaning up, and eventually welding. On the Ford Taurus, it is literally a rocker panel, and then you have the outside rocker panel, double rocker panel. Alright, here we are to the sawhorse, and I'm going to take and draw a straight line where the magic marker we put those 2 marks at. Then after drawing the straight line, I'm going to take 1/2 inch below where we had marked and put another mark with the magic marker, and going to take and draw another line across the 2 spots. Now that's completed here right now, and I'm going to take here the little 3-inch cutter tool with the wheel well worn down, and just put a little mark at the upper where you drew the line on each side, because here in a little bit we're going to be grinding, and the grinder will grind well the marker away. And there's our 2 little marks. And now the time has come to get the 4-inch angle grinder and cut on the lower mark. And furthermore, here is the time to grind the rust. And remember what I said about grinding the mark away? Well, you are, but you have the 2 little marks. When it comes time to weld the new piece in, you can just line it up with those 2 little where we nicked it with the small 3-inch cutoff tool. Alright, that is ground. I'm going to say that's satisfactory. And there's our fabricated piece of metal. Going to grab a pair of vice grips here and clamp it on both ends at the camera here that you can see what's happening. And, well, maybe. There's that one on. Want to try to clamp it fairly tight till we start welding. Now let us put a pair of vice grips on the other side of it, and those clamped on. And you see I have it, I'm using my metal bending brake for temporary holding. And here we're just going to put a little bit of weld. Now the next objective is to put one right in the middle, and I got this big wide C-clamp. Yes, it came from Harbor Freight. And we're going to clamp it is roughly somewhere in the middle. It don't have to be exact, so we can hold it tight to put another little baby stitch weld, and here we go. Okay, I thought it over. I want to get a few more little stitch welds put in, and eventually we will be moving over to the bench vise, but I moved the big wide silly C clamp here to another spot and put another one. If you notice with the C-clamp where it was in the last position, I did too. And actually it's pulling in nice. I'm going to put another one. Once you get them spaced about every 2 inches apart, then you can start doing longer seams and start actually making some pretty good progress. And on the subject, I did actually do about an inch long seam, and now I'm going to get this, like a Ford used it, I guess, for like sound insulation. It's warm now and it's scraping off. Later on, this becomes more of a problem when this actually gets welded on the car, but it's all that beep pillar, it's way up in it. It goes like up to the roof day, but I assume it again sound insulation, but it sort of stinks and wants to catch on fire while you're welding, and most of it here is coming with the putty knife, and now we're going to do some more welding. Alright, we're starting to make pretty good progress. Once you again get those first little stitch welds in, it goes pretty good, and then taking cleaning off our welding flux and some more of that insulation, that foam that was on it with the wire brush, and now we will weld again. If you take notice while I'm welding with it there, with sheet metal, I like hit the trigger for a second, pause for a second, and just back and forth. And there's, again, you keep the metal from getting so hot. and it won't, like I say, warp and burn holes in it. And as it's looking here, back where I was sort of concerned it was too rusty to weld to, well, it seems just fine because it's not burning any holes. And if you really are trying to weld to something too rusty, it just will immediately, like, just turn away, and you can't get no molten puddle or nothing to flow on it. So it's is working out just fine. And as stated in earlier videos, but if you're just watching this video, and although you should go back and check the other ones if you were doing this project, I used the flux cord wire. It don't make as nice of a weld as using the MIG welder with the gas, but again, on this you're not going to see it anyhow. And even with the gas wire, it does make a nicer seam. Like with auto body work, you still have to grind it and do a little fill work anyhow, so it's sort of irrelevant, and at least I don't have to worry about running out of the MIG welding gas. If you take notice, when out towards the end of the panel here, I carefully start my next weld, which I always do anyhow once you have your first stitch welds, but start your arc where you had already welded. It does again decrease the chance to burn through. And there you can see the back side of it, the seam. And again, it'll clean this up here on the back side, and we're going to do some more with this here to strengthen it up. However, before we do anything else, we're going to take a wire brush here in the angle grinder and clean the back of this seam up and get it nice and ready to weld from the other side. Now, I'm sure somebody's bound to make the comment you don't have to weld from both sides, but I think it's a good idea since it's all you can get to the rear side, but that is up to you. And here, again, we're put our little first stitch weld, and then we're going to do another spot. If you do decide to weld the other side, you will notice with the one already done, it does a lot nicer job welding because you're virtually, the other weld's so close, you're sort of just welding on the other edge of it. And here we're going moving along fairly at a fast pace on this. And you notice occasionally it wants to have trouble starting the arc. That's because of the flux from the wire. In theory, you should take the wire brush every time you start and stop and clean the flux off, but it would take forever. I mean, well, if you've noticed, I have used the wire brush throughout doing this, but I don't do it on every weld. It does, again, it'll slow you up pretty good, and this is going to take a long time as it is right now. However, after a few failed attempts, I am going to take and clean it up with the wire brush. And what else works really well, I didn't do it at this point in it, but later on in working in this, you'll see in future videos, I put a wire wheel in a cordless drill. it's a small wire wheel, and it actually does a nicer job than the wire brush, and you can clean up the flux to start your next arc. And if you noticed, I'm using a C-clamp mounted in the vent vise so I can weld on a nice horizontal surface, and it also made for taping purposes. I can move the camera around and to let all the viewers have a good look at the welding as it's being done. And the sheet metal I'm using on this is 20 gauge sheet metal. 20 or 18 is what you do the job. You don't want to go any thinner. It would be too thin, like down to 22 gauge wouldn't be any good. And then on the other hand, like on 16 gauge, it'd be too thick to bend. And now we're taking our wheel in the grinder and we're cleaning off all the flux. And now we're going to take and rough it up with this little miniature dual action sander I had bought at Harbor Freight, like so many tools, and get it all shined up here. The objective is just to rough it up so primer will stick good to it. But before we put primer, we're going to use some wax and grease remover and get rid of the dust and particles on it, because once it's on, this will seal the back side of it since it's off, and hopefully if it does over time get any moisture and that in it, it will prolong the life. It won't rust like it did before. At least that's the objective. And here we're using an aerosol primer, another Harbor Freight filler primer I always use, but it covers nice, as you can see. Alright, that's about done. Now we're going to go look over to the car, and where the spot welds were drilled at the bottom of this B-pillar, we're going to grind them down smooth before we take and clamp the inner panel back into weld in place. And I'm going to say that's pretty good. Here close up you can see what I had ground, and now there's our inner panel, and we're going to take and use this air punch and punch holes across this bottom lip so it can be plug welded. If you don't have one of these air punch flange tools, you can use a drill bit. Roughly about a 3/16 inch bit will be fine on it, but if you do have one, it works just like a paper punch, but for metal. It's a nice fast way to make holes, and there they are. I spaced the plug welds about 1.5 to 2 inches apart. If you see, they're not really exacting. It's not that crucial there. Now we're going to line this back up and get a pair of vice grips on it to hold it at the bottom and one here at the top. And now we'll just take and get it started, one up here at the corner towards the front of the car. And then we're going to take, once we get these clamped in, put one here, but of course on this bottom corner towards the rear of the car. And that it's not going to fall out now till we weld. And you see it's slightly a little bit of an overhang over the front part of that inner rocker panel, but that's not going to hurt anything. It'll weld good. It'll actually make welding easier. Now there it is right against, and there's our, you can see a better look at the plug welds, and we'll be welding to the nice new metal backing that was installed in an earlier video. Now I'll take here, we'll look at the upper edge where I have a clamp to the lip, and there's the original, those factory spot welds that were drilled out. Now they're going to be a little harder to weld in because they're large because of the spot weld cutter. But to begin with, I'm going to take and install a pair of vice grips here close, and we're going to start getting it fastened in that eventually we won't need any clamps. There's another pair of vice grips. I'm going to do this plug weld the second one back in first on the car. On those plug welds, just start in the middle of the hole, and then once you get the molten puddle, just work towards the outside on the small ones. And here I'm going to take and grind a little bit, and going to put a few stitch welds across before I even try working those big where the spot welds, the factory ones, were cut out, because they are, now that's a little bit different. Well, we'll discuss that in a little bit when we weld the first one, but there I'm just getting it fastened at the top edge. And yes, in between welding, while the metal's still warm and malleable, hammer and punch is good to push the metal back in so it won't be as hard to weld in a little bit. And there we're just doing another bit of a stitch weld across that top edge. Okay, that's fastened good at the top. Now I'm going to do this front edge. I could have actually ground around the edges on this what was off the car. But on the other hand, that would have been too easy. And I'm going to take it. It was sticking out a little far. Take the punch here and push it back in close to it matches up with the front part of the inner rocker panel. Alrighty, a minute or so earlier in the video I mentioned on the large where the spot welds were. I'm going to weld the first one. Now on those, instead of starting in the middle due to the enormous, do around the outside edge of the hole first, and then way at the end, then you can just, once it's smaller, then fill the center in. Okay, there's half. That was one like two real close together. I don't know why they do that, the robots at the factory, but there is that much done, and now we're going to move back down below and do another one of these small plug welds. Basically, you just sort of want to gradually, so you're not always welding in one place continually, to keep the heat down, is just move around from top to bottom, right to left as you're installing a panel. It's, again, I mean, there is a right and wrong way to do everything, but it's not so much like doing mechanical work that you can say step one, remove this bolt, and step two, take this out of your way. There's a little bit of a leeway in it, which is one thing I actually do like with body work over the mechanical work. I mean, there is, again, the right and wrong, but there is, you can sort of get more of your own style with it, so to speak. Yeah, essentially doing body work, you're sort of like an artist, a sculpture. You're building something from scratch, especially on these inner rocker panels, since you make the inner edge, since the new ones aren't available. You literally are like building a whole new part. Yes, I had received an interesting question, and it's always even putting a motor in a car or transmission or any major repair. Somebody asked, they told me they were, I think it was like around the same year as this car, 2001 or 2, if it was worth doing the repairs, the miles and that on. I'm not the one to say on that subject. A lot of it depends on, can you do the work yourself, the ability, the tools, the time. This videos are to show what is involved and sort of to anyone interested, whether if they want to tackle the job, not tackle it, or if you would choose to even have to pay someone to do it. I'm sure any reputable shop that can do the job is going to be very lowest cost would be $1,000 up to $4. But on the other hand, after watching this, if you would even decide to have someone pay to do it, I think you can see why the prices are charged that they are. It's, again, this is a lot more time consuming than like changing an engine in a car. Nevertheless, back on the subject of the car, here we're back on top welding. And again, these large spot welds where they were drilled out. I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, I believe there now. And there's one I did, the one that the two were side by side like two little eyeballs looking at you. And back to the punch. Just one thing about doing this body work too, it's sort of once you, like on this welding this in, you just keep repeating the same thing over and over. There's a few parts to learn, but then you just repeat what your knowledge you already have picked up. And we had earlier in the video cleaned some of this foam, this sound insulation off, and well, it's hard to clean off in there. If you notice welding, it caught on fire, but when it's hot it scrapes off a lot easier. But later on that becomes more of a problem when welding the piece in that goes over top this, when you can see it sticking down from the B pillar at the top. But that'll be upcoming video, not in this one. That's a pain. Obviously, one of the most expensive tools to do this repair is the welder itself, and that's sort of, if you do not already own one, I do not recommend buying the cheapest welder available. But for around the $500 to $600 range, there is a range of fairly decent welders available. I have a Hobart MIG 140, which is a good welder for home use. And back in the day with full frame cars, work like this, yes, I used the share of them before I owned a welder over the year. Pop rivets were alright, but since honestly on a unibody car this rocker panel is structural integrity on the car, I do not recommend it on at least this series. Perhaps maybe if just like a 6-inch long section or so was rusted strictly the outer layer, would be okay, but not as serious as rust as this car had on it. Okay, now my least favorite part of welding. I try to avoid it at all costs, but I can't turn the car upside down, is welding overhead, but get a little bit of a stitch weld, and I'll come back to it in a little while. And perhaps a question some of you viewing this may have is, after it's repaired, how long does the repair last? And the aftermarket is not as good as the original, but I have and still own it. It was my mother's, a 1999 Ford Explorer, and I put new rocker panels in it in 2011. Until about 2018, they were holding in real fine. And then I did a little bit of a touch-up, and now I'll admit it's sort of about back to where it had been in 2011, but a decade has passed since, with one little minor. Again, I just had to weld some small sections in. But for a good number, if you do it right, it should give you 4 years easy till it would be anything major again if you removed most of the old rust and put in all new metal. Really, they're welded out at that corner, and the ice sort of got to play tricks on me. I welded down below the actual plug weld, but it's not the end of the world. It happens. And then our last of these large spot welds closed in and it ended up at the top, and we're about to have this licked on putting this in place, except for that bottom edge at the front. And it didn't quite wasn't ready to weld the whole way shut yet. I had to take the punch in the hammer, push it back in, and now we can finish the plug weld on that large spot weld. Now I'm going to take and finish welding this seam across the top. This again's probably optional, but especially when you're doing those large spot welds after they're drilled out, it's a big area you're welding around. I don't know if they have strength, but it just makes me feel better to do the whole seam across the top, and it also helps seal the moisture and that out for the future. And here we're going to work some more on this front again. The key on the front sort of at times is to run a little bit faster wire speed and try to be a little bit, the key is just to get the pedal to work with you and to let gravity not fight with you so much. What else helps, and I do later in the videos on the welding overhead, is to get the car a little bit up in the air. I use the bottle jack just to lift it slightly, and your MIG gun makes the world of difference. Right now in the later part of this, the last video, my MIG torch wore out on my Hobart welder, and I bought a replacement MIG torch. And the replacement MIG torch has a flexible, at the back of it, it has a lot more flex, which helps considerable on the overhead welding, but I don't have it yet at this time. But on the other hand, here we're just having a great time here welding across the top of this. No problem at all. That's going nice. Easy to get to. And do use caution when you're welding on your car. If you noticed, I'm getting a good bit of smoke. That sound insulation is wanting to catch on fire. Now later in the video, before I put that outer piece on, I cleaned up as much of that as I possibly could, but you can't really get to it that great. I run a big long screwdriver up in and pulled some out and worked in from behind, but again, it's sort of closed off. You can't get to it really that great. Of course, that's one thing with the interior and everything pulled out of the car. If it would even somewhat catch on fire, there's not really much of it other than the sound insulation itself, much to catch on fire, because it's, again, no carpet or anything in the car at the moment. And here we're going to finish welding up this front edge. About done with that. Yes, that's one thing I will say on these Taurus and Sables. They're a good car mechanically, but this seems to be their weak spot, is the rust. And I did learn one thing before I tore this car apart, that plastic on the outside edge, yeah, that's definitely what holds the moisture and makes the rocker panels rust so bad. But a little bit of information, if you're in the market to buy one, you don't already own it. And that plastic, if it's in place, it could be hiding rust, but how you can tell it's hiding rust, there's push pins at the bottom. Now, if your push pins are all up in place, you're good, but if That's how this car was. The plastic was still in place, but when I went to pull that plastic off the bottom of the rocker panel, I think there's about 12 each side to go down. Only like 3 or 4 of those plastic push pins are in yet, because simply put, the metal that was holding them behind rusted away and they could no longer hold in place. And there's some more. That's actually seam sealer there that caught on fire, but it went out and we about got that, and there it's on fire again, but it's under control. It's going a little bit better welding up ahead this time. I actually brought it around from the outer edge where I was starting on the previous weld. And here we're going to do some more. It's coming. It's not, again, as easy. But till later in this, with everything, as I mentioned, it does go better. Practice more of it. Better tools. And just a little bit of the car up in the air. Furthermore, a little pointer here, you can listen to the welder while I was doing it. You could tell I was struggling because it was just sort of snapping and cracking. It wasn't making a nice sizzling sound like I've always been told when you're welding good. It sounds like baking, frying, but I'm not getting that. Alright, this is starting to become a little bit of a too much welds build up, pumped up. I'm going to take and grab the grinder here and clean this off, which will actually help weld it when we're done. And that is another little trick here. Alright, now with that done, let's give this a try again and see what happens this time around. But no, as I was saying, when you're starting to get weld and it's just sort of in a big heaping hill and it's not doing what you want, that's always an option. Take and grab the grinder or smooth it out, and then sort of gives you a fresh base to build upon. And here it is going better. I'm going to soon say here we're getting pretty close to this will be taken care of. Alright, I'm going to say that is good enough on that bottom edge. I'm tired of standing on my head and welding, looking up above, and there you can see the complete welded in everything across the top edge, and those large where the spot welds were cut, and that little corner, and look here down across the bottom lip where the plug welds are. And everything's all in place. It's certainly not going to fall out. And there is the ugly where we were welding overhead. Not the greatest, but again, it's not going to be seen. And it's holding in that front seam. And here's the back side where you can see those plug welds where they went through the inner part there. And a little bit of a burn through on that one, but not much. But that's sort of what the back side of your welds should look like. Well, one thing, this is the lower edge, but of course it was nice and easy to weld because you were welding new metal to new metal. Now that one right there, that is too much of the burn through. It was too hot and it melted through, but yeah, well, can't, like I say, the others are doing their fine. It will happen. And there we're at the top where those large plug welds were, because where the spot weld cutter had cut, and there you can see that seam sealer. It was what was burning occasionally. And here it's time to move on. Alright, time to put the welder away a little bit, and it's time for a marker and a ruler. And measuring here, it's I believe 2 3/4. And I'm going to put a few marks out across this rust because we're going to be removing that couple inches. And then we're going to be doing like we did earlier, making a piece for the clear back edge. And the reason I didn't do the front piece longer to start with, I have mentioned this in other videos, I'm working with a 4-foot long piece of sheet metal, so I can't make anything longer than 4 feet. I'm going to take here and just draw a line out across them using the ruler. And an interesting thing on these Taurus and Sables, where I'm drawing the line back towards the back of the car, this center piece actually like gradually wraps back in towards the center of the car. Just a real gradual little bit it bends back, and you can sort of, if you look real careful, you can even see it in the video watching. And needless to say, finished drawing this line, and we're going to take, and now we get to remove metal. Alright, now I'm going to take and just chop this out, because coming up here where the rear trailing arm, there's a bracket that's welded that's not going to come off anyhow, and you do not want to cut through the inner bracket, just this outer layer of rust. So I'm going to be cautious here, and your car will be the same if you're working on a Sable or Taurus, but I'm going to go over it here real careful and just go through the outer edge, and we'll get that taken off the trailing arm brace. Alrighty, I'll show you what I'm talking about. There you can see the nut at the end of the trailing arm, and here bend this back, and you can see that outer piece is spot welded to the bracket for that trailing arm. And we're going to take and trim some more of this rusty metal out and get more access. Okay, there you can see where it's at exactly, the front edge of it, and you can see right where the back edge is. And I'm going to just take and cut straight up here, and again just get other than right over the trailing arm bracket, remove this rusty metal, and we'll come back to that in a second. Now, unlike earlier with the actual removing the rocker panel, I do believe an air chisel will take this off, because one, the spot welds from the factory don't hold as good, because that bracket is probably around 3/16 inch thick, and number two, you're not going to rip the inner part up, and this outer part doesn't make any difference. And it does seem to be the air chisel is going to take most of it off. It's sure saving time drilling spot welds. And one thing you do when you're cutting an that, besides not cutting through this bracket, take notice your emergency brake cable's back behind it, and that's something just to sort of be cautious of. It never ceases to amaze me. 99% of it's going, but this one little piece of metal's fighting. But it's a little bit of twisting and turning, and they all but got it off. Oh, there was still a piece of it there. Yeah, you want to remove all of the outer that you can of the rocker panel, and there's a little bit. I'm going to go grab the air chisel again and just break it free. Now that's more like it should have worked. And here's one more piece where the spot weld was from the factory, that the little piece of that outer part of the inner rocker panel stuck, I guess you could say. And there it is. And now we can finish trimming here back to the edge of the car, this last couple inches. Yes, eventually all that rust for a couple inches up above will have to be removed, but I'm doing this again cautiously, that you sort of have a pattern to work with to build more metal. And I only want to, right now I'm worried about this, complete this back edge of the, so we can get the next part of that inner rocker panel in. And now the 4-inch angle grinder is too big and clumsy. I have to resort to the 3-inch 90-degree air cutoff tool to finish this up, and it's doing the job in the tighter area. Now here's another spot where the inner fender meets this back part of the rocker panel. It's an extra layer over top. I'm going to I got through the first layer and take the air chisel, and as earlier, like we did at the trailing arm bracket, take and use that to remove the outer layer of the rust to make sure not take more than we want out at the time. However, under the circumstances, it's not really being real cooperative, and I think it'll be just fine. I'm going to take and just use the grinder here, the 4-inch, and finish this, cutting this out. Well, actually a combination of the grinder, and I'm going to take it here and finish knocking it off with a hammer. And this is going to conclude this section of the video. I hope you have found this helpful. If you have watched the earlier videos, I'm sorry the delay till this video came about, but it's been extremely busy. And if all goes well, within the next week I'll have another one out, and that should, well, probably 2 more. It should finish the series up. Again, I'm trying to be thorough with it. And here, our chisel again. I'm going to knock that out. Okay. Again, there's our emergency brake cable. And there's where we're going to pick up on the next video. Thank you for watching. And please check back again.